You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Monday, the 11th of November. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, Liam Payne, Jackie O, and who should be held responsible for another person's addiction. Also, it's been 5 days, but it feels like a month. In the wash-up from the American election, what's actually useful in understanding what it means for women everywhere. And a children's book written by a very famous man has been pulled off the shelves all around the world. How did it get there in the first place? But first, Jessie.
In case you missed it, there are 6 words we're being instructed not to Google. A cybersecurity company named Sophos says that a very specific search term has led to a bunch of cyber attacks. Here we go. Do you want to know what it is?
Yes.
You're not to Google it.
Yeah, out louders.
Out louders.
Don't
Google it. Are Bengal cats legal in Australia?
What?
I know. You would think, how common is that search term, right? It's
What's
like
a Bengal cat?
And what does it reveal about you?
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily reveal anything about you, but what people have done, what the fraudulent scammers have done, is the links at the top that would tell you the answer are fraudulent. So once you click them, they take all your personal information.
Oh.
So they found something that is so like you wouldn't imagine there's any worry that you would be like the victim of, a cyber attack just by Googling that term.
But does it mean that a lot of people Google it, or there's just this one specific term that there aren't any legitimate answers to?
There
and
are
they've
legitimate.
Infiltrated it?
They've infiltrated it, but it's more like they found a space where it's so inconspicuous. I think people think if they're Googling, hardcore porn, or if they're Googling bad stuff online, then
Can I find love in Nigeria?
yes, then maybe
Have I won? Have
the
I really
lottery.
won $5,000?
Exactly. Then maybe then you'll be tricked. But the idea you could just be Googling that, which in Australia is kind of a popular search term because it's obviously relevant to us. Well,
But is it that in every country? Like, is it are Bengal tigers?
Bengal cats legal in
cats.
Australia. It's the same one in every
Right.
country, but they've said Australians, you're particularly sensitive because this is particularly relevant to you.
Because I've Googled pot-bellied pigs.
Because you want to get one?
Yeah.
No, you
And
don't.
teacup pigs. I did.
No.
I went through a phase like you wanting to get a fringe. I had big feelings.
How do you think the dogs are going to feel about your teacup
And they
pig?
manifested into, I think, what could help me in my life is a little baby
Tiny
piglet.
pig that's
Yeah.
never really a teacup. They keep
No,
getting
that's
bigger.
what I learned through my Googling
So I have
after
been
I paid a man $5,000.
I've been meaning to ask you guys if you're on the receiving end of this weird scam that I've been on the receiving end of lately, which is I keep getting emails from people being like, this is Richard, the manager of a very big podcast in the US.
I got the
Are
same
you getting
one.
that?
I got that too.
And then it's got like the name of a real podcast that exists. And then it says, we would love you to be a guest. Kind of looks like it was written by AI.
Yeah.
But the giveaway for me was when it said, we'll pay you $3,000. And I went, no one pays you to be a guest on a podcast, you silly, silly scammer.
No.
And it doesn't give you the name. But I kept asking Luca, how is this a scam? Like, how are they getting things out of me? And he said, they will ask for your bank details so that they can deposit it and then
Correct.
they'll take all your details.
I
Yeah.
keep getting ones that say, hey, Mum, I've lost my
Oh, no.
phone.
Yeah.
But it's always a tell because they always say something like, if you send me $10, I can receive it or whatever. And I'm always like, my daughter would not say receive. She wouldn't know whether the E went before the I or the I went before the E. Come on now.
She'd say, give me money, Mum. That's it.
I've been in records with you when she has texted that exact thing, but it was her or was it not
It
her?
actually was her, but then it's just like, need $5 for lollies.
3 people have been arrested and charged in Argentina over the weekend in connection to the death of Liam Payne, the One Direction star who died on the 16th of October after he fell from his hotel balcony in Buenos Aires. He was 31. The official toxicology results have also been released, revealing that he had traces of alcohol, cocaine, and prescription antidepressants in his body. And the postmortem has also shown that because he did not adopt what's called a reflexive position during his fall, they could tell that he was either semi-conscious or totally unconscious while he was falling. They have ruled out that anyone else was involved or that he jumped.
So reading between the lines is the implication that it was an accident?
Yes.
Okay.
And that he was so out of it, basically, that he fell off his balcony. So the people that have been charged, the first charge is against someone who, authorities haven't named any of them, but they said it's someone who accompanied him on a daily basis during his stay in the city of Buenos Aires and is charged with abandonment of a person followed by death. And another defendant is a hotel employee who is accused of supplying cocaine on 2 occasions. And the third is an alleged drug supplier who's also charged with supplying him on 2 separate occasions, I think including on the day that he died. Now, as I said, no names have been released, but one of the people that was reportedly seen with Liam Payne in the hours before his death was a mate of his who we won't name in case it has nothing to do with him, but he has denied abandoning the singer. And it got us thinking about whether the people around a person with an addiction hold any responsibility, because I wasn't even aware, I mean, I guess every country's different, but that there was a crime of basically it's like a duty of care. Like if you are with someone who is that out of it or unwell that they could harm themselves and you just leave them, and something bad happens, then you are implicated in that death.
Yeah, you'd imagine that's a hard one to implement because you'd have to prove that the person knowingly abandoned them, not like just left. Just left.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes.
Yeah,
go
well,
on.
I think it's that you can leave, but if this person is a risk to themselves or other people and you leave, then you are implicated. And this week on No Filter, I interviewed Jackie O, and it was a conversation about her addiction. We spoke about it on the show last week. Her memoir came out and she revealed that she'd been addicted to pills and alcohol for several years. And her rock bottom was different, and we spoke about that on the show. But I also asked her best friend, Gemma O'Neill, who was the first person Jackie called after she hit rock bottom. Gemma, she's also in the interview because I wanted to hear from Gemma's perspective how the addiction played out, how surprised she was by that phone call, and how she managed the period afterwards in dealing with someone who had an addiction and then having to get her to rehab because Gemma organised all of that. I also asked Jackie whether she's angry at the person who was supplying her with these prescription medications. Here's what she said.
That's a good question, actually. Because I know my friend Gemma is angry with that person. But I am not, because I put them in that situation and I know they gave me an extraordinarily large amount of medication, but I can't turn around at the end of it all and go, well, you shouldn't have done that. I don't know what, I was lying to them as well. I mean, I wasn't saying it was all for me. I was saying, oh yeah, I've got some people at work who need, still knocks as well because we all work crazy hours.
Okay.
So I was lying to them.
This is tricky because you don't want to go into the specifics of this particular person who is supplying Jackie O. But that person was breaking the law, like quite obviously. Obviously for doctors and pharmacists, there are very strict regulations around a lot of medications, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get approval to write scripts. I mean, anyone who's on, ADHD meds knows that. Anyone who needs strong painkillers for legitimate reasons knows that. So that person is to blame because they broke the law.
Yes, but don't you think, and I wonder if it's similar with the Liam Payne story, that what we do with addicts, especially when they are someone in the public eye who we feel like we know, or maybe there is an addict in our life who we do know, we like to have really clear parameters around who is a victim and who is a perpetrator and who is exploiting who. And addiction mixes all of that up.
Absolutely.
And in
what way?
When you are an addict, and I loved that answer by Jackie O because it was so honest, and that is the number one thing coming out of that book is everyone is saying she did not have to be that honest.
It's a brilliant book.
But what she was saying was I was exploiting them too. And even in the case of Liam Payne, when I heard the detail of the hotel worker, and again, supplying someone with an illegal substance is a crime, right? But the power dynamic in that, if he's in a hotel room overseas and I think that we scramble to blame, and especially when someone has died and when you have this fandom around Liam Payne. But Liam Payne also made a series of decisions that were driven by his addiction, which is an absolute tragedy. But I don't think it's as simple as those people exploited him. And I think this is what happens as well when addicts say, I would have done anything to get my hands on that. It doesn't mean that it's right, the people who are supplying it, but I do think that there's a mess of power and exploitation here that is very difficult to see clearly.
That's a really good point, because Jackie spoke to me about how her assistant had seen all the empty blister packs and had started writing her notes saying, I'm really worried about you. She was the first person to confront her. But because Jackie wasn't ready to deal with it and she thought of herself as an addict but wasn't ready to deal with it. She would just like scrunch them up and throw them away and they would never talk about it. And you're right. What power did that person have to intervene? And Liam, you told me this morning, which I didn't realise, is that he'd been resuscitated a couple of times before. You know, family, friends, girlfriends would more than likely have known that he was a big drug user and that he was struggling with addiction. What do you do? Like, what do you literally do? Do you call an ambulance? Do you call the police? That was probably just another night for him. Maybe it was.
And how many hotels had Payne been to where a hotel worker, where some poor person off the street had supplied him with cocaine? We don't know.
Yeah.
Like, he was someone who had spoken about having addiction issues, but you don't know it's going to be the time where someone loses their life.
You can't. I think the question about what do you do, that's the tricky part, Mia, because anyone who's loved an addict knows that you can go to the ends of the earth and you can try everything and you can cut them off and you can enable them and you can intervene and you can refer them to places and you can pay for rehab. None of that is going to solve it.
We learnt that from Matthew Perry, didn't we?
We did. He says he spent something like $9 million in the end on trying to get rid of his addiction, cure his addiction, and it did not work. And he had professional sober coaches. That's something that a lot of celebrities and people of means have, who live with them and try and keep the people who would be happy to break their sobriety away. And you can build fortresses around people to a point, but at the end of the day, addiction is a very tenacious disease and people will do all kinds of things. So I think that Jackie O saying, you know, I was exploiting that person too, as you say, Jessie, is being very honest. However,
shows a lot of self-awareness.
It does, and she's right. She's actually the only person who knows exactly what she said to that person, the lies she told, the lengths she went to, all of those things. So she's the right person to make that comment. However, it doesn't mean that the person who broke the law and supplied you drugs that you shouldn't have had should be off the hook. In New South Wales, there is actually a crime on the books now for supplying drugs that cause death. And it was put in place after a couple of festival deaths where friends were going to festivals together and they might all take drugs, right? And 2 young people that summer did tragically die. And the reason that law was rushed through was as a deterrent to be the idea of like, I might organise the pills for everybody for this party, for example, to put a deterrent in place saying that can be risky if you don't know what you're doing. But it's an imperfect solution to anything, right? Because so it's not a crime to supply the drugs if they don't die, but it is if they do. The person who ran out on Liam Payne that night, if indeed it was him, may have done it many times before or may have been at the absolute end of their rope of like, I cannot try and unpick this one more time.
Or might have been really out of it themselves.
Yeah, it's a very complicated situation that I think we are only beginning to really get our heads around.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this comes right on the heels of the doctors who supplied Matthew Perry with ketamine and his assistant who was injecting him. And this guy had been his assistant for like 25 years, who'd seen him through a lot. And again, you say, well, how could you do that? How could you be supporting an addict in that way? But the power imbalance, particularly when it's a famous person, is really different. But I loved this interview, not because of any skill on my part, but because the conversation that I had with Gemma and Jackie about what addiction looked like from the inside and step by step, also what happened to get out of it, like what it actually looked like for Gemma to get Jackie to rehab. And it wasn't easy, and not just logistically, which was its own story, but trying to get an addict to agree to get help. That was really interesting, and who knows how many of those conversations had been had with Liam Payne and indeed Matthew Perry before they died. Still to come, the real winner from this year's The Block Australia finale, and it's not a contestant.
Friends, I'm not going to assume that I know how you're feeling less than a week since the world tilted just a little on its axis after an American election result that was far less close and far more Trumpy than anyone imagined. You might be stoked. You might be depressed. You might be quietly resigned. But after an intense saturation of what the hell happened analysis in the days since, you might also be confused. We're here to help. We've listened to 1 million podcasts and read 1,000 think pieces on this matter, so you don't have to. And very, very top line, we're going to give you a couple of reasons for why the world is the way the world is today. At least this is what experts are saying. People are angry about the state of their lives, financially predominantly, in a post-pandemic, hyperinflated, war-torn, cost-of-living shitstorm. People just want change and they want things sorted. And all over the world, they're tossing out the governments they've already got in favour of someone, anyone with a new idea. Don't shoot the messenger. I didn't say that the guy has any particular new ideas. Also, the thinking goes, Harris ran a good campaign, but she was never going to be able to distance herself from the status quo because she was part of the status quo. And then there's the Biden should have stood down sooner argument, and there's the she should have gone on Joe Rogan argument, and there's the she was too radical, she wasn't radical enough arguments. So there's all that. But another very big takeaway, and what we want to talk about today, is the gender thing. Because if you haven't already heard this, you're about to. Almost all groups swung to Trump, but men swung the hardest. Blame the manosphere, blame Elon Musk, blame Rogan or Andrew Tate or whoever you want to blame, but the data backs it up. In America, but not only in America, men are leaning more right and women are leaning more left. And now a man who has had at least 26 women accuse him of sexual misconduct holds arguably the world's most powerful post.
Again.
Yes. And no wonder your feed in the last few days has been full of panicky, tearful, angry women asking why America hates them. So, Jessie Stevens, do you think it's true?
Mine hasn't, because I muted all those people a long time ago.
Does Trump's win mean that America just really does hate women?
I don't think it does, and I don't think it's helpful. There's a few ways to approach it, because you can wonder, did people vote for Trump or did they vote for change? Did they vote against a woman or did they vote against Biden's government? The answer is all of those things. Like, there are just so many voters that there isn't one narrative, as hard as we might try to overlay it. And really, when we try and throw our narrative on it, all we want to do is prove the theory we have about the world already. And I got a newsletter from one of my favourite writers this week, and the subject line was, "This is how much America still hates women." And it said, they hate us and they think we will learn to hate ourselves too. And I just kept thinking, who are they? Again, it's causing the increasing polarisation, which I'm particularly sensitive to. And I was listening to Ezra Klein, who I found his analysis really, really helpful. And he basically said we have two choices about how to approach this. He's a Democrat. If I was in the US, I would have voted for Harris, just to be clear. But he said we can look at it with contempt and that anger and frustration and go, oh my God, these are a bunch of racist.
Yeah, that's which is the mood into in 2016, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Pussy hat protests.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or we can look at it with curiosity. And there's not a lot of curiosity in yelling, everyone who voted for Trump hates women. It also doesn't totally make sense because women voted for Trump, black people voted for Trump, Latinos vote. Like, it's a very simplistic way of doing it.
Well, a lot of different people can hate women, including women. It's possible.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Yes, that's true, but I don't think that's the only answer. And he said, to be clear, when he says approach it with curiosity, you don't need to fully understand it. You certainly don't need to endorse it because bad leaders are elected all of the time. We don't have to go, the majority was right. Like, you don't have to look at this and go, I think that what happened is right now that I actually speak to people. But I think that if you are confounded by something, and we've had examples in Australia as of late, I think rather than just being horrified, and I remember feeling this actually after The Voice, when that was voted down, I went, we live in a racist country. And you know what? I actually think First Nations people get to have their own opinion about that, and I'm not First Nations. But I do think that it is then worth going, what were the hurdles and what did people think they were voting for?
But I also disagree with that premise. I don't think that the no vote was purely about racism.
And that was,
I think it was also about the fact that the campaign wasn't explained well. It wasn't clear what people were, like, there was a lot of confusion.
Yep.
I think it was handled badly. You know, there are a whole lot of things. And so just like you say, not everybody that voted for Trump hates women. Not everybody that voted no is racist.
And it's a neat narrative. And even with the same-sex marriage plebiscite, in order for the lobby groups to convince the no voters to vote yes, they had to understand what the hurdles were. And they had to go, oh, so you're afraid that this will happen. Let's communicate to you that that isn't what will happen. And I just worry that yelling at men that you hate us, yelling at everyone who voted for Trump that they're racist and sexist is just going to lead us to greater polarization. And just on a basic level, the panic we're throwing into the world, like, that isn't good for us.
I've been thinking so much and listening to lots of things because I had my 24 hours of feeling like that, and I still do, of course, but I'm curious, like, I'm really curious. And after the 2016 election on No Filter, I did a series about getting out of the bubble and talking to people on the right and trying to understand the appeal of Trump. And I've been wanting to do the same this time and looking at all the different factors. A couple that have stood out to me, I was listening to one of my favourite podcasts about American politics, Pod Save America, and they were saying how even though Kamala didn't run on identity politics, she was smart in that way because it's not very popular apart from on the left and the hard left. She didn't mention her race. She didn't mention being a woman. Very different to Hillary. She owns a gun. So she didn't try to say
She recruited lots of Republicans to stand next to her. She was being very bipartisan.
But a lot of people on the left and a lot of, influencers and people on social media did still frame it that way. And this idea of identity politics, I even remember when she was first announced as a candidate, there were all these Zoom fundraisers that sprung up, and it was like white women for Kamala, straight white men for Kamala, and they had their own Zoom, black women. And I think that there's a large proportion of the population who really reject identity politics and don't want to be categorised in that way. And it was interesting that what people thought would be a deal breaker for Trump, or could be, when the comedian at his rally said that Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage, and Puerto Ricans voted for Trump. So this idea that immigrants will necessarily all vote as a bloc, or women will all vote as a bloc, is just misguided. And I think that that's something that I think over the last decade or so, and I'm going to generalise, but the scoldy nature of cancel culture and castigating everybody that isn't morally pure enough in your estimation, or that doesn't think exactly the same way as you do, I think that that's really alienated people. And I think what Trump does, I think Ezra Klein maybe said it last time, or it could have been Sam Harris, Trump makes people not feel ashamed. Which is not necessarily a good thing, because he also makes them feel not ashamed if they are racist or misogynist or grab women by the pussy, which is shocking. But there are a lot of people in the middle who are tired of being called racist or sexist or transphobic because they maybe accidentally use the wrong pronoun, or they question a particular part of an ideology. And I think that also contributed to it.
I sympathise with it. I think you're right, Jessie, 100% about you've got to meet this with curiosity. I've been having arguments with people all weekend about the fact that we've just got to entirely, and when I say we, because we're moving into an election year, and Australia is different, but there will be lessons taken from what just happened there. You're already reading about it. The Liberal Party, the National Party, and other parties on the right are energised, excited, and hoping to bring a culture war to our shores any moment now, right? And I think that you've got to be curious. We've got to watch the judgment and the dismissal that we use all the time. I couldn't agree more. But just a word for the crying women on Instagram. I entirely get it. I particularly entirely get it on that night, in the first 24 hours after that happened, because I felt it really hard on Wednesday night. I woke up panicking at 3 a.m. And it's a word that's bandied around too much, but I felt very triggered by this, because the thing is, even though I deeply believe that it wasn't about gender, actually, I think it was about class. That's what I think this election was really about. The things that the people who went out and lined up and got off the couch and did all the things to vote for Trump had to overlook to put their little dot in that little box were extraordinary from a woman's point of view. And they are things that we've been learning for 10 years, so it wasn't necessarily new. Character doesn't matter. Cheating doesn't matter. Bullying women doesn't matter. Groping women doesn't matter. Sexually assaulting them in change rooms doesn't matter. Calling them names, getting whole arenas to chant, bitch, lock her up, whatever you want to do, doesn't matter. So the people who voted for him, and I don't believe they did it because they liked that stuff. I'm entirely on board with that.
Some did.
But some of them did, but they were willing to overlook it, including all the women.
It wasn't disqualifying.
Who did, right? It didn't disqualify. And that feels kind of viscerally shocking for a lot of women. Yeah. And I respond to that very much. Did I get on Instagram and cry? No, because I agree with you that putting that panic out in the world is not good. But also, I'm going to make the clear point that that is an equal opportunity game. All the right have done for a long time, the Trumps have done for a long time, is stoke panic and fear themselves. So we can talk about cancel culture, but the most damaging thing, in my opinion, about that is how easily weaponized by the right it is, right? You can't say anything anymore. Actually, look around, you can say whatever you want. You're not in charge of anything anymore. Actually, all the CEOs of big tech companies are male. You're not in charge of anything anymore. I think we are. It's an illusion that is easily weaponized by that side of politics. So I agree entirely about taking the temperature down, about not throwing massive assertions out there that men hate women, all these people aren't educated enough to understand what he's going to do. I hate all that. But I also think that it's not only the left who's guilty of throwing panic and fear out. In fact, I think that's really how Trump won the election, is by saying all the things that are wrong with your world are easily fixed by tough white people in charge. And they turned the dial up on that rhetoric really hard. And the Dems were actually trying to pull it down all the time.
I'm with you.
And it didn't work. So I agree with you that I think we need to really watch that. But I also just kind of want to say, I get it.
What was different about this time is that it was post Me Too.
Yeah.
We were meant to have overcome something. We had this cultural revolution.
But was it in part a backlash to Me Too?
Yeah.
In the same way that some people say 2016 was a backlash to Obama.
Yeah.
Was this a backlash to Me Too? I know what you're saying, Hol, and I understand. For me, when I look at the crying, shouting women on Instagram, I choose not to do that. I'm also conserving my energy.
Yeah.
I marched in the streets after 2016. By the end of his term, we will have had 12 years or more than 12 years of Trump either being president, running for president, or being president in waiting. That is a big chunk of our lives. And I just, for the same reason that I had to switch off from American politics kind of halfway through his second term, I feel that way now. And I hate myself for that a little bit, because I just am I can't do it.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I don't think that the enemy here or the people we should be criticising are people who had an emotional response on Instagram.
Of course not.
Absolutely not. And again, I felt it too. And I think that when you see who's running the world, it feels deeply anti-feminist, and I totally get that.
Yeah.
But I reckon that in terms of the next 4 years and in fact where the culture is going, I've heard a lot of we need to keep educating them.
Yeah, I hate that.
And I think there is something so intrinsically condescending, and that's not what curiosity is. Curiosity is going, what do these people actually say? Because they don't think that they were taking away your abortion rights, and they don't
I think misinformation is different, though.
Yes.
I agree with you, but someone's saying, they just need to be told.
Yeah.
100% in agreement. And I also want to, because some outlouders have said to us, and it's absolutely fair comment, they're like, if you're that surprised by this, you're in a bubble. I want to make it clear, we actually weren't that surprised by the election result.
Not at all.
But the world was surprised by the resounding scale of the election result. So the fact that it was so...
Even Trump.
Yeah, Trump was also...
Every swing state.
So it's not... Of course, we're in bubbles. We're all in bubbles. I think that's the other thing that's massively overlooked here is how much the media has changed and how you can't compare these times really to old. But like a lot of people I know work harder to get out of their bubbles than anybody. But it's still a shock because it isn't what everybody thought was going to happen at this level, right? And it does say something about the culture and it's worth examining.
$2.5 million in a good bid it is at 2.5? 3?
3.5 million.
What? You just won the block.
Welcome to All or Nothing, where we unpack an issue you either know everything or nothing about. Today it's this. You have either been talking for 24 hours nonstop about how Lambo guy bought every single house on the block last night, or you think that me saying Lambo guy is just me mispronouncing Lamborghini. And look, that would be a fair assumption.
Are you?
No.
Oh.
Lambo
Who's Lambo?
guy, exactly, is a guy with a Lambo. So.
A Lambo is a Lamborghini.
I know it is, but Lambo guy is his name.
Oh, I see, yes.
I'm not mispronouncing Lamborghini.
So I'm so excited that you're going to explain this because I fall into the know nothing about this camp. And everything I read about it yesterday, I didn't understand because it started in the middle of the story as if I knew who Lambo guy was, and I don't.
Good. I'm going to tell you very quickly. Last week, of course, we were talking about a cheating scandal on the block, something. Honestly, who knows how all that ended up? Because all anyone cares about now is that last night, all the teams made loads of money because they sold the 5 houses on Victoria's Phillip Island for a combined $15 million to one person, Lambo guy.
I bought your house as well, yeah? You know that, yeah? I bought your house as well? Yeah! I bought all of them!
He's called that because he drives a bright yellow Lamborghini, which is possibly the fanciest spotto on the road. He drives other cars too, McLarens and things. But
So he's a... Do you think he might be rich? Is that what you're...
rich.
Okay, he's a rich man.
Why do we care? Well, let me tell you who has that kind of money. He is a dude called Adrian Portelli. He's from Melbourne. And he's worth an estimated $1 billion. He's only 35 years old. He apparently made all his money in tech startups, making and selling apps in LA.
Any apps we've heard of?
None that I had heard of.
Okay.
He likes to spend his money on his Instagram, where he has 400,000 followers who like to watch him do it. Mostly it's on cars that look like toys. He has one kid, and these days his job appears to be being rich. He's one of those online guys.
Is he single?
It's not clear. He has a kid with a woman referred to often as his mystery girlfriend, for who he bought a big fancy car as a push present for their baby, but not entirely clear if they're still together. These days, Lambo guy makes more of his fortune by running one of those online platforms that people subscribe to and they can win prizes. And the last time he bought block houses, he gave them away on that platform. So it's actually like a business model for him. And he's just announced that what he's doing with these 5 and their common area and everything is giving them away as an entire resort to his subscribers and followers. So it's all part of a scheme.
So did he buy all of the block houses?
So he bought all 5 of them. They didn't necessarily know they were selling them to him because what he does, the reason he's called Lambo Guy is he drives in his yellow Lamborghini at the last minute. He's done it the last 3 years, I think.
On the block.
On the block. And he drives up and he goes, it was me, or sometimes it is him, or sometimes he has a buyer's agent. So the 5 people didn't necessarily know it was him until the end when he comes in and he goes, I bought them all. And now maybe he'll give away that house with the terrible garden where the guy told the other one that he wanted to go out for a drink with her even though he was married.
That's interesting. So the part I did understand in what I read is the reason that he bought them all, apart from it being a good way to get a lot of attention, is there is apparently, I've not watched it, there's a common area, and if they were all going to be sold to different people, everybody would get like a 1/5 of that common area, but he gets the whole common area because he owns all of it, so he then says it's worth more. I don't know how to think about it. Do I have to have a thought?
No, God,
okay,
no.
good.
I
Phew.
imagine he just really likes the block. Remember when Dave Hughes bought the block?
because buying houses that were on the block, buying houses that are on the block, if you're smart, can make you a lot of money.
Can it?
Because everybody's seen that house and they want that house, and if you don't pay too far over the odds, you can sell it on. Or you can do what he does and you can, give it away on the internet. Not he hasn't done that with all of them. Give it away on the internet, make everybody pay you for the honour and then get richer again. Anyway, you probably don't need to remember about Lambo Guy because he says he's not going to buy any more block houses. That was his swan song and he's out.
Oh,
Do you feel in any way better about anything, knowing that information?
I needed to know who he was because I've seen his name around and now I understand, sort of. After the break, Jamie Oliver and the children's book pulled from shelves globally.
Do you want daily Out Loud access? Why wouldn't you? We drop episodes every Tuesday and Thursday exclusively for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get us in your ears 5 days a week. And a huge thank you if you're already a subscriber.
Jamie Oliver, celebrity chef and author of 24 best-selling cookbooks, is in Australia. Did you know, actually...
He's not having a good week.
He's not having a good week, but did you know that Jamie Oliver is the best-selling non-fiction author in all of UK history because of his cookbooks?
More than Harry Potter's fiction,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yep. I knew you were going to do that.
There are
Stand
non-fiction books about that wizarding school in Scotland.
Didn't they make a documentary about that?
They made 7.
Hogwarts, the documentary.
Non-fiction is when a book is true.
Sorry.
That is what makes what I'm about to tell you all the more baffling. Oliver's latest children's book, it's titled Billy and the Epic Escape, has been withdrawn from sale due to an offensive storyline regarding First Nations people. So according to The Guardian...
Seems a bit out of his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
He's a cookbook author. What's he doing writing about?
So this is the second children's book, and I was a bit confused initially because I thought it was like a real children's book, but it's a 400-page, for primary school age kids.
What we call a chapter book.
A chapter book.
When your kids move from the picture books that Luna's looking at
Yep.
to like reading on their own, it's a chapter book.
It's a chapter book.
Okay.
So, according to The Guardian, I have not read this book because it has been pulled, but a young First Nations girl in foster care appears in the book. Her name is Ruby, and she is living in an Indigenous community in Alice Springs when she gets kidnapped by the villain of the book. The adults responsible for Ruby are distracted by the villain's promise of funding for their community projects. Once abducted, this little Ruby tells the English kids that she can read people's minds and communicate with animals and plants because that's the Indigenous way. The chapter of the story is called To Steal a Child.
Ooh.
Sharon Davis, who's the CEO of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Commission, she described the book as damaging and said it perpetuates the harmful stereotype that First Nations families are easily swayed by money and neglect the safety of their children. The book also contains errors. So while the girl is supposed to be from Mbanta, Alice Springs, she uses language from the Gamilaroi people of New South Wales and Queensland. So Oliver and Penguin Random House, UK, conceded to Guardian Australia that no consultation with any Indigenous organisation, community or individual took place before the book was published. Oliver has released the following statement. I am devastated to have caused offence and apologise wholeheartedly. It was never my intention to misinterpret this deeply painful issue. Together with my publishers, we have decided to withdraw the book from sale. The publisher then said, Penguin Random House UK publishes the work and takes responsibility for the consultation, or what we would call an authenticity read of the work. It was our editorial oversight that this did not happen. It should have, and the author asked for one, and we apologise unreservedly. Holly, I think the question we're all asking here is, how did this happen?
Well, according to Penguin Random House right there, it happened because they either forgot or didn't bother to get a sensitivity read, an authenticity read, as they're calling it, which seems remarkable, right? Because Jamie Oliver's children's book is going to be high profile, a big release, just in terms of the way that book publishing works. And look, I'm not an expert, but obviously we all have had books published and we understand the process. Publishing a big book by a big author like Jamie Oliver is not something that just happens in over a weekend. You know what I mean? It's not like he hands it in and you go, sure, we'll just run it up on the photocopier and put it on the shelf. Like, that's not how it works,
And
right?
presumably he didn't even write it, let's be honest.
Well, who knows, right?
Well, he would have worked with a ghostwriter, I'm sure.
We have talked about
Most likely, yeah.
how lots of celebrities are writing children's books. We talked about that recently because, well, clearly they're very lucrative. So this
Not
book
this
would
one.
have gone through several rounds of edits. I mean, it's fiction, so checking is an interesting idea when it comes to fiction. But you would think, because this kid travels around the world, as I understand it, so the Australia chapter is only one chapter in many, You would think that there could be all kinds of potential pitfalls, such a high-profile book there, to get things wrong, cause offence, cause a storm, exactly like the one that he's in now. So the idea that they didn't check that is wild.
Now that I understand the difference between fiction and non-fiction, I've never written fiction. Apparently I have written non-fiction.
Yes, you have.
You've both written fiction. I would like to know when and why do you decide to use an authenticity reader or a sensitivity reader? Who pays for that? How does it work?
It's often written into people's contracts. It depends if that's coming from the author, but the publisher as well would often suggest, we think that because you've written a character who is from the Pacific Islands, then it would be a very good idea for you to get someone to read this. The big one as well is about neurodiversity at the moment, like having someone read it who's from that community and can pick up on things that you simply couldn't if you didn't belong
fiction,
to
there's
that
been
community.
a lot of discussion over the years about whether authors can write in the voice of people who have a different lived experience to them, maybe people from different cultures or different genders or different sexualities, because the publisher won't know necessarily until you've handed in the book, right? So,
And the thing is to be honest, how big a deal the book's going to be will probably inform how much they're willing to invest in that kind of thing, right? So sometimes the author will do it. I remember recently Jodie Picoult was in Australia and Jessie and I both did an event with her. But I listened back to an interview that you did with Jodie in 2016, actually the first time Trump got elected. She was here. Yeah. But she had just written a book then. One of the main characters was an African-American woman and the other main character was a white supremacist male, right? And she wrote from both their perspectives. The chapters oscillate between them. Now, that book did get criticism for that, no question. And she said herself that she's not entirely sure she would do that again. But she was at great pains to point out to you and to everybody that she had, you don't just hand a book to a person with that lived experience and go, tell me if I got this right. If you're doing it properly, you have to make sure you've got the right people, you've got a range of opinions who are going to give you insights into whether or not you've struck the right words, whether you've gotten anything wildly out of proportion or wrong. And in this instance, it seems to be clear that if Oliver had a read on this from First Nations organisation or individuals, they would have said, maybe not that, and maybe not that.
And this is why you go with a big publisher as well. Like Penguin Random House UK would be one of the biggest publishers in the UK. That's why they've got Jamie Oliver. The reason that people don't want to self-publish often is you want to have the backing of a big publisher who will look after you. I've had instances, and I would actually give the example if I could remember it, but I used a turn of phrase that I didn't realise was offensive, that, might have been a description or it was rooted in some history that I had no idea about. And it goes through your editor and then it goes through copy edits, and I would say at least 4 or 5 people read your full manuscript and your primary editor reads it multiple times. That was picked up immediately. And my initial reaction is just, I'm so lucky. Like, I'm so lucky that I've got someone who can look at that for me. So I'm looking at this going, Jamie Oliver.
he was really let down.
He was really let down by his publisher. And you can say that there is a lot of context where you go, oh, you wouldn't touch that. But it also reminded me that in Australia, I am so grateful that our curriculum from kindergarten, even from early education, covers First Nations history, and it's so integrated. We are beginning to...
It's true, actually. A generation ago, no one would have even picked this up.
Yeah.
This wouldn't have, let alone, withdrawn the book from sale. There was no such a thing. So I think, I think we should acknowledge that we've come a long way. Clearly there's further to go.
Yeah.
But
in the UK, to go, wow, to have missed that, there is just a total other universe that I suppose they're living in.
But certainly arrogant to not think that you would need to consult with people when you're writing about their culture.
And publishers, including Penguin Random House here in Australia, generally acknowledge that sensitivity readers or authenticity readers have made books better. They make all kinds of literature better because more authentic, rooted in real experience, and, that really sometimes it is definitely the writer's obligation to do that first. But when you're a writer on the scale of Jamie Oliver, he would have definitely assumed that they were going to do that, I think.
And I learned something when I was in the Northern Territory recently. I was speaking to a lot of First Nations people and I would ask a question. Let's say I was in Alice Springs and I'd ask a question about Darwin. And the person I was speaking to would say, I can't tell you that story. The way that country works, and this is, very generalised, but it's the same as when someone does a welcome to country, that needs to be their country. So if a story is going to be told, you can't just go somewhere else and tell it. So there is such nuance and such complexity with storytelling in a culture that is 40,000 years old that you would need, a sensitivity reader for anything that's covering that kind of material.
That's all we've got time for today. A massive thank you to all of our Outlouders for listening to today's show and being here with us, and to our fabulous team for putting it together. We're going to be back in your ears tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There's a link in the episode description.